Dawn broke over the valley of Eurotas in a thin band of crimson and gold, the kind of Spartan sunrise that promised sweat, dust, and iron before the day's end. Yet on this morning the sun rose to a silence that felt unnatural even to the hardened warriors of Laconia. No clatter of training shields, no barks from drill masters, no war chants from the Agouge fields, only a heavy, breathless stillness that hung over the land like an omen. Lysandros, son of Dorion, commander of the outer phalanx, stood upon the rocky ridge overlooking Sparta's terrace plains, his bronze helm tucked beneath his arm as he surveyed the distant horizon. His eyes, dark, unyielding, shaped by 27 years of discipline, narrowed as he took in the sight of thin trails of dust rising in the far north. Riders. Scouts. And they were returning far too quickly for comfort. The wind carried faint whispers of the approaching hoofbeats. Behind him, the morning light glinted off the red cloaks of a dozen warriors, his closest unit, each one forged by the Agouge, each one loyal unto death. Among them was Nikarit, the renowned shield maiden whose skill with spear and shield had silenced every man who ever doubted her place among Spartan ranks. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "You saw it too," she murmured. Lysandros nodded. "A storm approaches," he said quietly. "Not of nature, of men." Moments later, the scouts reached the ridge, their horses foaming, their faces streaked with dust and dread. The lead scout, Timon, dismounted so quickly he nearly fell. "Commander Lysandros," he gasped, struggling for breath. "The Persian Empire marches again. And not just an army, a tide. Tens of thousands. Their banners stretch to the horizon. They bring immortals, archers, cavalry, siege men, even war beasts. Athens has already sent pleas for aid. The north is burning." A cold weight settled in Lysandros's stomach, though his face remained carved in stone. Sparta had not fully recovered from the wars of years past, their kings dead, their armies thinned, their glory dimmed, but Persia cared nothing for wounds. They had returned to crush Greece once and for all. He dismissed the scouts to rest, and turned to his warriors. "Sound the horn," he said. "Sparta wakes to war once more." The great bronze horn atop the ridge called out, its deep note rolling across the plains like thunder. Villagers stopped in their tracks. Farmers dropped their tools. Children stared wide-eyed. In every Spartan heart, that sound meant the same thing: assemble. By mid-morning, the elders, officials, and remaining warriors gathered in the long hall of the Gerousia. The structure was lit by dim torches that cast tall, wavering shadows on the wooden walls. Lysandros kneeled before the council of remaining elders, men whose hair was white but whose eyes were as sharp as hungry wolves. "Rise, Lysandros," said Elder Myron, voice graveled with age. "Tell us what you've seen." Lysandros recounted the scout's report with precise, economical words. The council listened in grave silence. When he finished, Elder Cleomenes leaned forward. "Sparta's armies are depleted. We do not have the numbers to meet Persia on an open field." "No," Myron said, "but we still have Sparta's heart and Sparta's shield." Some elders nodded, others frowned. Sparta's military power had waned since the wars of Plataea and Thermopylae, and though their spirit burned bright, spirit alone could not turn aside an empire. Nikarit stepped forward, violet torchlight reflecting off her bronze armor. "We have options," she said boldly. "There are warriors in the hills, those who escaped servitude, those who seek redemption. There are remnants of old phalanxes in the villages. Young men not yet of age, old men not yet dead. If we call them, they will come." Cleomenes scoffed. "You propose we arm children and old men?" Nikarit's gaze sharpened. "I propose we remind every Spartan that our land is not defended by age, but by sacrifice." A murmur spread through the council chamber. Lysandros stepped beside her. "We need not stand alone," he added. "Send messengers to Arcadia, Corinth, Elis. Some will answer, some will not. But all must be warned." Myron stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Even with allies, we will be outnumbered 10-1. "Then we fight 10-1, Lysandros said simply. The elders exchanged glances. It was madness, but Sparta had always thrived in madness. Myron finally raised his staff. So be it. Call all warriors, all youths of the Agoge, all veterans who can lift a shield. Summon allies where we can. And prepare. His voice dropped lower, trembling slightly with emotion. For this may be the last war of Sparta. The words settled like ash through the hall. Outside, the sun had reached its peak, and Sparta buzzed with preparation. Blacksmiths hammering armor, mothers sharpening spears, elders blessing young warriors with solemn pride. The old training fields filled with recruits, boys barely past childhood, men whose scars told a dozen stories, women whose eyes burned with fury. Lysandros moved among them, correcting stances, demonstrating phalanx formations, his voice steady and clear. Remember this, he told them. The shield is not for you. It is for the warrior beside you. Break formation, and you doom your brothers and sisters. Hold the line, and even the mightiest empire can break upon it. Nikarit trained a group of young fighters, her movements sharp and fluid. She wielded spear and shield with terrifying grace, shouting instructions. A Spartan fights as one, not for glory, not for praise, but for the land beneath your feet, for the blood in your heart. The young ones mirrored her movements, sweat pouring down their brows. By sunset, the army, if it could be called that, stood assembled. Fewer than 600 Spartans. Perhaps 200 allies. A mere flicker of fire against the Persian inferno. Yet every one of them carried the unmistakable steel of Spartan resolve. Lysandros walked the rows, studying each face. Fear lingered in many eyes, but beneath the fear was something stronger, an unbreakable determination born of ancestry, honor, and necessity. Warriors knew their names would either die with them or be carved into history by blood. As night fell, torches illuminated the training fields in flickering gold. Songs of preparation echoed across the valley. Low, somber chants, hymns for the doomed, prayers for the brave. Lysandros stood upon a small rise overlooking his gathered force. Damon approached with a grim expression. The Persians will be here within days, he said. Perhaps less. Then we march to meet them, replied Lysandros. Not at Sparta's gates. At the pass of Arion. Damon's brow furrowed. That gorge is narrow, but dangerous. If they flank us, they cannot, Lysandros said. We collapse the rear entrance. Trap ourselves in with them. Damon stiffened. You mean, fight with no retreat? Lysandros looked out toward the dark hills. Spartans do not retreat. Damon bowed his head. Then at dawn, we march. Late into the night, under an ink-black sky, Lysandros sought solitude on the ridge where the scouts had first returned. The moon cast a faint silver upon the valley. He closed his eyes, hearing the whispers of old battles, the clash of Thermopylae, the roars of Plataea, the cries of warriors long buried. He felt their presence like ghosts standing behind him. We will not let your memory fade. He vowed to the silent night. A soft step approached. It was Nikarit. You carry the weight of all Sparta on your shoulders, she said gently. And you carry much of it with me, he replied. She smirked. Then we share this burden. And we share the battlefield. He nodded. The two stood in silence, gazing north where faint orange glows began to stain the distant horizon. Fires, villages burning, Persia drawing closer. Tomorrow, Lysandros whispered, we march to our fate. Nikarit touched the rim of her shield. Then let our fate tremble before Spartans. Dawn bled slowly over the rugged hills as the army of Sparta, if such a small force could still be called an army, assembled at the edge of the valley, their bronze armor glinting faintly beneath the pale morning light, their crimson cloaks fluttering like tattered banners of defiance in the cold wind. Lysandros stood at the forefront, his expression carved with iron resolve, his shield strapped firmly across his left arm, his spear balanced in his right hand, Nikarit at his side with a stare. Sharp enough to cut stone. They marched in silence, the rhythmic thud of their sandals and the creak of leather armor, the only sounds echoing across the plains. For Spartans wasted no breath on battle songs when death itself awaited at the next horizon. Behind them, the younger recruits moved with determined rigidity, their jaws clenched, their eyes hardened by training compressed into a desperate few days. Yet Lysandros saw the fire in them, the same flame that burned in Spartans of old, a flame that refused to be dimmed by the shadow of Persia. As the sun lifted, the army wound its way toward the pass of Arion, a narrow gorge carved between two towering cliffs, a natural bottleneck where numbers meant little and courage meant everything. When they reached the entrance of the gorge, Lysandros halted and gestured for the builders and laborers who had marched with them. These men and women carried pickaxes and saws instead of spears, for their task was equally vital. They would collapse the rear of the pass once the Spartans were inside, sealing off retreat so no warrior could falter, no coward could flee, and no Persian could encircle them. Damon approached Lysandros, his brows knit with worry. "Once the rock falls, we are trapped," he murmured, as though saying it aloud made the danger more real. "We will either become legends," Lysandros replied quietly, "or we will die unknown in the dust. But either way, Persian feet will not tread upon Sparta." Damon nodded slowly. "So be it." Under Lysandros's signal, the Spartans entered the pass, the towering rock walls rising like enormous fangs around them, the shadows deepening as they marched deeper and deeper until the gorge narrowed to a single-lane corridor barely wide enough for a phalanx of 6. When Lysandros reached the point he had chosen, he raised a hand. "This is where we make our stand," he called. The sound bounced sharply between the stone walls, amplifying his voice until it seemed the very cliffs repeated his words. The workers at the rear used their tools to weaken the ridge supporting the entrance. With a thunderous roar that shook dust from the cliffs, hundreds of tons of rock tumbled down, sealing the pass behind them in a cloud of stone shards and earth. The Spartans did not flinch. Not even the youngest among them turned to look back. Lysandros felt a wave of grim pride. They were entombed now, entombed with their fate, with their determination, with their pledge to hold the line or die beneath it. As the dust settled, Nikarit approached Lysandros, her spear twirling casually between her fingers though tension pulsed in her movements. "We are boxed in," she said. "Good. Now they cannot flank us. Nor can we escape," she added. "We would not have escaped anyway." Nikarit smiled faintly at that, her eyes burning with fierce resolve. "Then let Persia break itself upon us." For hours they worked, arranging shields, stacking spare spears, digging shallow foot trenches for stability, sharpening stones for ranged throws, preparing the narrow pass for the charge of an army many times their size. Lysandros inspected each formation meticulously, correcting stances, adjusting spear lengths, positioning archers atop small natural ledges. By midday, the preparations were complete. The Spartans lined the pass, 6 shields wide, 30 ranks deep, shoulder to shoulder, shield overlapping shield, a wall of bronze and will. Beyond the narrow opening ahead, the land sloped downward toward the open plains, shimmering beneath the hot sun. Lysandros could see faint distant movement, a dark line crawling across the earth like a tide of ants. He stepped atop a rock and raised his voice. "Spartans! Sons and daughters of Laconia!" The phalanx lifted their faces toward him, eyes burning, breath steady. Beyond those plains marches an empire of slaves, slaves to gold, to kings, to fear. But here, he struck his fist against his shield, here stand free warriors. Here stand shields unbroken. Here stands the last wall between our homes and ruin. A murmur of fierce approval rippled through the phalanx. "If we fail," Lysandros continued, "Sparta falls. Greece falls. But if we hold for 1 hour, 1 day, 1 breath longer than Persia can endure, then we become more than warriors. We become the line history will never forget." The Spartans slammed their spears against their shields in thunderous unison. The sound echoed through the pass like a heartbeat of iron. Damon stepped beside him. "They come." And indeed they did. The first Persian banners appeared on the horizon, a shimmering wave of color and silk followed by an unending stretch of armored infantry. Rows of archers, cavalry, siege engineers, and the dreaded immortals in their black and gold armor advanced with mechanical precision. The earth trembled with their march. The cliffs vibrated from the sheer magnitude of their approach. A Persian commander rode forward, flanked by standard-bearers. He halted just outside the narrow mouth of the pass and called out in Greek, "Spartans! Lay down your arms and surrender. Xerxes offers mercy to those who submit willingly." Lysandros stepped forward, planting his spear in the ground. "Sparta kneels to no king," he replied, his voice ringing across the stone. The Persian commander's face hardened. "Then you will drown beneath the weight of our empire." Lysandros lifted his shield. "Come try." The commander gave a sharp signal, and a horn blared. The first wave of Persian infantry surged forward, charging into the bottleneck of the pass with a roar. But the narrow corridor choked their numbers, forcing them to collide in disorganized clusters. Lysandros shouted, "Shields up!" and the Spartan wall locked into place just as the first Persians slammed into the bronze barrier. The clash rang out like a thunderclap. Spears thrust forward, piercing the front ranks. Nikarit moved like a serpent, slipping her spear between shields to strike with lethal precision, each thrust finding a throat, an eye, a gap in armor. Damon's shield absorbed blow after blow, his arm trembling with the force, yet he held firm. "Push!" Lysandros roared, and the entire front line surged forward in perfect unison, driving the Persians back several steps. Bodies fell. Blood splattered. The narrow ground became slick with death. The Persians regrouped and tried again, this time with archers firing volleys overhead, but the Spartan shields angled perfectly, deflecting the rain of arrows. Again and again the Persians threw themselves at the phalanx, only to break like waves against a cliff. Hours passed. Sweat poured from the Spartans, but none broke formation. Not one. As dusk approached, Lysandros noticed new movement in the Persian ranks, tall, armored warriors with ornate masks. He recognized them instantly. "Immortals," he muttered. Nikarit spat. "Let them come." The immortals charged with ruthless efficiency, blades sharp enough to split bone, their coordination unmatched. For the first time, the Spartan line shook. Damon narrowly blocked a strike aimed at a young recruit. The immortal's blade slid across his shield, cutting a jagged groove. Another immortal lunged at Nikarit, but she ducked low, rolled beneath his thrust, and drove her spear upward, impaling him through the ribs. Yet more took his place. Lysandros saw fatigue in his warriors, spines bending, arms trembling, blood loss taking its toll. The Persians sensed it too. They pressed harder. The phalanx wavered. For the first time that day, fear brushed the edge of Spartan resolve. Lysandros roared above the chaos. "Hold the line!" But an immortal spear struck him in the shoulder, sending a burst of pain through his body. He stumbled, then righted himself with a savage growl. The immortal came again, blade raised. Lysandros swung his shield with all his strength, smashing into the warrior's skull with a crack that echoed through the pass. The immortal fell. Lysandros steadied himself, blood flowing down his arm, breath ragged. The daylight dimmed. The battle raged. And Persia kept coming. But still the Spartans held, their shields dented but unbroken, their formation shaken but alive. As the last rays of sun vanished behind the cliffs, the Persians finally withdrew to regroup for the night. The valley fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of exhausted warriors. Lysandros staggered to a rock, blood soaking his crimson cloak. Nikarit kneeled beside him, wiping sweat from her brow. Damon surveyed the devastated ground beyond the pass. "They will return at dawn," he said, voice thick with exhaustion. "With more. With stronger forces." Lysandros nodded grimly. "Let them come. We are Spartans. This pass is ours." And as the stars appeared overhead, faint and indifferent, the last shields of Sparta prepared for a night without rest, knowing full well that tomorrow would decide not just their fate, but the fate of all Greece. Night settled like a heavy shroud over the narrow pass of Arion, the stars faint and distant behind thin veils of drifting smoke, and the exhausted Spartans, bloodied, bruised, but still standing, prepared themselves for the darkest hours before dawn. The Persians had withdrawn, but the silence they left behind felt more threatening than their spears, for the air was thick with the smell of death and the promise of even greater horrors at sunrise. Lysandros sat with his back against a rough slab of stone, his wounded shoulder throbbing sharply with each heartbeat, though he refused to show weakness before his warriors. Nikarit crouched beside him, her fingers moving deftly as she packed crushed herbs into the wound, her brow furrowed in focus. "You should rest," she murmured, though she knew he would not. Lysandros exhaled slowly, his breath clouding in the cool night air. "A commander rests when his people are safe," he said quietly. "And my people stand on the edge of death." She tied a strip of cloth over the wound and pressed her palm against his chest briefly, not in affection but solidarity. "Then we will stand with you until either death takes us or victory bows to us." Around them, warriors patched armor, sharpened spears, whispered words of courage, or simply stared into the darkness whispering the last quiet prayers they would ever utter. Damon moved along the line, encouraging the youngest recruits, lifting a fallen shield and pressing it into the hands of a trembling youth whose voice shook as he spoke. "My father died at Plataea," the boy whispered. "He said Sparta never breaks." Damon placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Your father spoke truth. Today, you hold his place. Fight as he did." The boy nodded, resolve hardening behind his fear. Far beyond them, faint torchlight flickered like a distant constellation, hundreds, maybe thousands of Persian flames lighting the plains. Lysandros watched them shift and swell like an approaching tide. "They're preparing," he muttered. "They're not beaten. Not even winded." Nikarit followed his gaze, her grip tightening on her spear. "They have numbers," she said. "We have walls. We have cliffs. We have discipline." Lysandros shook his head. "And they will bring new tactics at dawn. They know now that sheer numbers cannot break us." Damon joined them, his face grave. "We captured a wounded Persian officer," he said. "He claims the immortals were only the first wave. Xerxes sends war elephants next. And siege towers on wheels." Lysandros stiffened. "In a gorge." Damon nodded. "Modified ones. Small enough to be pushed through the outer mouth." Nikarit hissed sharply. "Siege towers in a narrow pass could crush their formation." "They'll box us in like cattle," she murmured. "Or try," Lysandros replied, rising slowly to his feet. "But Spartans are not cattle." He took a deep breath and gathered his warriors. Torches lit the cliff walls, illuminating faces streaked with blood, dust, and determination. "Tonight," he began, "we sharpen our blades not only for the flesh of our enemies, but for the machines they bring. The Persians believe we will crumble before their engines of war. They do not understand the heart of Sparta." He lifted his shield. "A shield is not wood and bronze. A shield is a promise. A promise to the warrior beside you. A promise to the land behind you." The Spartans slammed their spears against their shields once more. A low, rumbling thunder that shook the narrow pass and echoed far into the night. Lysandros divided his forces, sending archers to the cliffs to rain stones and fire upon the siege engines. The youngest warriors dragged boulders and logs into position to roll down from the heights. The veterans reinforced the front of the phalanx with extra spikes and sharpened stakes hammered into the ground. Nikarit oversaw the sharpening of their spears and the construction of fire-tipped javelins. Damon coordinated the placement of the heaviest shields at the front. Together, they shaped the pass into a fortress. As the hours crept by, exhaustion threatened to pull the Spartans into sleep, but they forced themselves awake with cold water, harsh discipline, and the knowledge that the moment they allowed their eyelids to close could be the moment their enemy struck. Near midnight, Lysandros wandered to the mouth of the pass, staring into the distant Persian camp. The ground far below glowed red with the embers of thousands of fires. Silhouettes moved among them, soldiers, horses, beasts he could not identify. He thought of the stories told by his grandfather of giants with tusks as long as spears, armored beasts that crushed men underfoot. "You look troubled," Nikarit said, coming to stand beside him. "I look alive," he replied. "That alone troubles me, given what dawn will bring." She smirked faintly. "Then let us survive dawn as well, and trouble Persia instead." Lysandros shook his head, but a rare smile ghosted across his lips. When the first faint hint of silver crept across the horizon, Damon appeared at their side. "They're moving." And so they were. Torches shifted. Shadows surged. Hundreds of Persian infantry advanced in perfect formation, pushing forward massive wooden engines braced with iron, compact siege towers with armored fronts, protected by lines of soldiers with interlocking shields. Behind them, the ground trembled as war elephants lumbered into view, their tusks capped with iron spikes, their backs carrying archers and soldiers armed with javelins. The Spartans braced themselves. The cliffs filled with archers holding crude but effective fire arrows. Lysandros lifted his spear and inhaled deeply. "Spartans," he shouted, "today we face iron, fire, beasts, and the weight of an empire. But we do not face it alone. We face it as brothers and sisters, as shields, as Sparta." The Persians charged. The siege towers rumbled forward, pushed by dozens of soldiers. The elephants trumpeted, shaking the very stone beneath the Spartans' feet. Arrows darkened the sky. "Archers!" Lysandros roared. "Loose!" 1,000 flaming arrows rained down from the cliffs, igniting the Persian front. Wooden structures began to burn. A war elephant bellowed in agony as flames licked its flanks, rearing back and crushing several soldiers beneath its feet. The siege towers pressed onward, smoke trailing from their sides. "Boulders!" Damon barked. Warriors atop the cliffs rolled massive stones over the edges. One crashed directly into a siege tower, splintering its supports and toppling it onto the Persian infantry. Another crushed a war elephant's leg, sending it collapsing in a violent thrash of tusks and screams. Yet still the Persians came. The first intact tower reached the narrow mouth of the pass, dropping its ramp with a heavy crash. Dozens of Persian soldiers surged out. "First rank, brace!" Lysandros commanded. The Spartan wall tightened. Shields locked. Spears lowered. The Persians slammed into them, but Sparta held. Spears pierced armor. Shields bashed skulls. Nicaret spun her spear in a deadly arc, cutting down 3 men in rapid succession. Damon anchored the left flank, driving his shield into attackers with bone-breaking force. For every Persian that fell, more pushed through the narrow tower ramp. But the Spartans fought with precision, funneling the enemy into a choke point where numbers meant nothing. "Push!" Lysandros roared. The phalanx surged. The Persians were forced backward, stumbling into their own lines. Another tower reached the pass. More elephants advanced, their riders hurling javelins from above. Arrows filled the air. The sound of battle echoed like thunder trapped between the cliffs. Hours passed. Bodies piled high. Spartans fell, some pierced by arrows, others trampled beneath panicked beasts. But the line held. Still, Lysandros sensed the tide shifting. The Persians had begun rotating fresh units forward while Spartan numbers dwindled. Sweat blinded his eyes. Blood dripped from a cut along his cheek. His arms trembled each time he raised his spear. As afternoon shadows stretched across the pass, a massive figure appeared, a Persian general clad in black and gold, flanked by an elite guard of immortals. His voice cut through the noise. "Spartans! You have fought with bravery unmatched. But this pass will be your tomb." He gestured forward, and a new wave of elite soldiers surged toward the pass. Heavily armored, disciplined, relentless. The Spartan line buckled. Damon staggered. Nicaret screamed for the right flank to reinforce. Lysandros felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him like a mountain. And then, he heard it. A crack. The immortals drove forward with terrifying force, and the front of the phalanx finally wavered, shields slipping, formation bending. If the line broke now, Sparta would die. Lysandros forced his battered body upright, raising his shield high. "Spartans!" he roared, voice raw and thundering. snatching the attention of both armies. "This is where we hold. This is where we live or die, but we do not break." A roar erupted from his warriors. Every last drop of strength surged through their veins. The line tightened again. The shields pressed forward. And against all odds, the pass held. Barely, desperately, miraculously. Through the blood-soaked hours of the second day, night fell without mercy over the pass of Arion after the brutal second day of battle. The sky a dark canvas splattered with faint, trembling stars that looked down like distant, uncaring witnesses as the exhausted Spartans slumped against blood-soaked rocks, their bodies trembling from wounds and fatigue, their shields dented beyond recognition, their spears broken down into jagged stubs. Yet even as their chests heaved with painful breaths, none dared close their eyes for long, for they knew that the smallest lapse in vigilance could be the moment Persia unleashed its next assault. The gorge was littered with bodies, Persian and Spartan alike, stacked in uneven heaps where they had fallen, the air thick with the iron scent of blood and the stench of smoke. Lysandros limped through the carnage, his left leg dragging slightly from a deep gash inflicted during the last immortal charge, but he walked upright, refusing help from anyone, refusing to show weakness when so many eyes, young and old, hopeful and despairing, turned to him for strength. Nikarit met him at the center of the pass, her armor cracked in 3 places, her braids matted with ash, her eyes red from exhaustion yet still burning fiercely. "We held again," she whispered hoarsely, disbelief lacing her words. "Somehow, we held." Lysandros placed a bruised hand on her shoulder. "Not somehow," he murmured. "Sparta held because Spartans held." She nodded, though her gaze drifted toward the towering cliffs where archers sat slumped over their bows, fingers shaking too violently to string new arrows. Damon approached next, wiping blood from his brow, his shield arm trembling uncontrollably from overuse. "We can't survive a third day like this," he said bluntly. "We've lost nearly a third of our number. The Persians lost 10 times that. But they have more. They always have more." Lysandros turned to face him fully. "All we need is 1 more day," he said quietly, though Damon could hear the strain beneath the words, the truth that Lysandros was saying what he needed to believe, not what he knew. Damon exhaled. "And after that?" Lysandros didn't answer. Instead, he climbed onto a boulder overlooking the surviving warriors. "Spartans!" he called, voice echoing through the narrow gorge. The murmurs fell silent. Every battered, half-broken soul turned toward him. "Tonight, we do not sleep. Tonight, we prepare for the greatest storm we have ever faced. The Persians will bring everything at dawn, every soldier, every beast, every weapon. They believe we are finished. They believe our shields have cracked." He lifted his shield high, battered but still intact. "Show them they are wrong. Show them our shields hold until death." A fierce cry erupted from the Spartans, weak, ragged, yet burning with the flame of those who had accepted death and embraced it. The night became a frenzy of hurried preparations. Wounded Spartans were propped into positions where they could throw spears from behind the line. The dead were moved into piles that could be used as obstacles, grim but necessary. Archers dipped bundles of cloth in oil to make fire arrows for one last volley. Nikarit oversaw the sharpening of every usable spearhead. Damon directed the stacking of rocks along the cliff ledges. Above them, the night wind howled through the gorge like a warning. Hours crawled forward. Lysandros stood alone at the mouth of the pass, staring into the Persian camp below. Fires burned brightly, their heat glowing orange against the darkness, illuminating rows upon rows of tents that stretched as far as the eye could see. But tonight, the Persian camp was not merely busy. Tonight, it was roaring. Music blared, drums thundered, soldiers shouted triumphantly as they prepared their final assault. "They believe tomorrow ends us," Nikarit said softly, stepping beside him. Lysandros nodded. "Tomorrow, they throw the weight of an empire against a handful of shields." She turned her gaze to him. "And we will meet it." He looked at her, saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face, but also the indomitable spirit that made her the fiercest warrior he had ever known. "If we fall," he whispered, Let it be said Sparta did not go quietly. She touched her spear to his. We will not fall quietly. Before dawn, an eerie silence settled over both camps. Even the wind felt still, as if the world held its breath. The first pale blue of morning kissed the edge of the sky when a low rumble rolled across the plain. Damon sprinted toward Lysandros and Nikarit. "They're coming," he said, though his voice sounded unnecessarily low, as if the approaching thunder deserved reverence. And then they saw it, an enormous shadow creeping across the plains as the Persian army surged forward, tens of thousands strong, banners whipping violently in the cold morning wind. At their forefront marched the immortals, masked and silent, ranks perfectly aligned. Behind them came shock troops carrying massive shields, and behind them, the siege engines, new ones, larger and reinforced with fresh iron. Further back, a monstrous engine rolled forward, a massive battering structure pushed by dozens of slaves, flanked by archers perched on wooden towers. And then, shuddering the earth with each step, came the war elephants. More than a dozen of them, their tusks glinting wickedly, their trumpets freezing the blood of even seasoned warriors. Lysandros took his position at the front of the Spartan line. Damon and Nikarit flanked him. The Spartans behind them formed the phalanx, 6 shields wide, 20 ranks deep, the last that remained. The Persians halted at the mouth of the pass, drums pounding like the heartbeat of a giant. The Persian general who had taunted them days earlier stepped forward, mounted upon a black stallion. "Spartans," he called, "your time is over. Submit now, and some of you may yet live. Resist, and you will all die meaningless deaths." Lysandros stepped forward. "There are no meaningless deaths for Spartans," he replied. The Persian general sneered. "Then let this pass be your grave." He dropped his arm. The drums stopped. The world held its breath. Then the Persians surged. The shock troops charged first, slamming into the Spartan phalanx with deafening force. Shields shuddered. Spears snapped. Men grunted, teeth clenched as they pushed against the overwhelming pressure. Behind the shock troops, arrows rained down like a dark storm. Few found purchase, the shields held, but one arrow grazed Lysandros's cheek, slicing a thin line of blood across his face. He did not flinch. "Push!" he roared, and the phalanx surged forward as one, sending the first wave of Persians crashing backward. But then came the immortals, slipping through the gaps created by fallen men, their wicked blades flashing in the narrow space. Lysandros blocked a strike aimed at his throat and countered by slamming his shield into the immortal's mask, caving it in. Nikarit spun like a storm, her spear a blur as she pierced 2 immortals in rapid succession. Damon guarded the left flank, holding off 3 attackers with grim, unyielding fury. The elephants advanced next. The cliffs trembled under their weight. One lumbered toward the mouth of the pass, its armored head lowered like a battering ram. "Archers!" Lysandros shouted. "Loose!" Fire arrows streaked down from the cliffs, striking the beast's armor. It bellowed in pain but continued forward. "Stakes!" Damon cried. Several warriors rushed forward with long spears reinforced with iron. They planted them in the ground as the elephant charged. The beast impaled itself, shrieking, thrashing wildly as its riders fell screaming from its back. Yet another elephant pushed in. Then another. The ground shook like an earthquake. Blood spattered across the gorge walls. Still the phalanx held. Still the shields remained locked. But the Spartans were tiring, terribly, dangerously tiring. Their arms quivered. Their breaths came in ragged gasps. Their wounds bled freely. After hours of relentless pressure, Damon staggered, dropping to one knee. Lysandros blocked a blow meant for him. "Up!" he commanded. Damon rose, swaying, but stood firm once more. Nikarit fought with a ferocity that defied exhaustion, but even she stumbled, her movements slowing. The Persians sensed it. The immortals pressed harder, splitting their formation at the center. Lysandros roared for them to hold, but the pressure was too great. The phalanx wavered. Shields slipped. A gap formed. The Persians poured into it. "Fall back to rank 2. Lysandros shouted, but the words were drowned by the roar of battle. The Spartans fought in a chaotic spiral, the orderly line dissolving into brutal close combat. In the chaos, Lysandros found himself face to face with the Persian general. Their blades clashed in a storm of sparks. The general struck with overwhelming force, driving Lysandros backward. "Your legend ends here," the general spat. Lysandros gritted his teeth. "No," he growled. "It begins here." With a surge of desperate strength, he smashed his shield into the general's jaw and drove his spear through the man's chest. The general collapsed in a spray of blood. The Persians faltered, stunned by the fall of their leader. But the victory was fleeting. Beyond the mouth of the pass, entire battalions still waited. Thousands more. Too many. Damon stumbled to Lysandros's side. Nikarit dragged 2 wounded young warriors behind her. The Spartans reformed what little remained of their line. Fewer than 80 warriors stood. Lysandros's voice cracked as he shouted the words that would define them forever. "Spartans! This is our last shield wall." And the exhausted, blood-soaked warriors lifted their shields one final time as the next Persian wave began to charge. The third day dawned not with sunlight but with a cold, metallic haze that clung to the air like a final omen, and the Spartans, those few battered, unbroken souls who still stood, felt its weight settle on their shoulders as the rumbling roar of the Persian army rose once more from the plains below. The gorge trembled with anticipation, the cliffs echoing with the distant thunder of drums, hooves, and the grinding wheels of war machines, and Lysandros knew, with the quiet clarity of a man who has stared death in the face too many times, that this day would carve their names into the bones of history or erase them forever. His shield was cracked nearly in half. His spear chipped and crooked, his body a map of bruises and bleeding cuts, yet he stood at the very front of the line, less than 80 Spartan warriors behind him, and perhaps 40 allies from Arcadia and Corinth still fighting by their side, each one leaning heavily on their shields, each one swaying with exhaustion but refusing to fall. Nikarit stood to his right, her spear stained nearly black from dried blood, her breathing shallow but her gaze blazing with the ferocity of 10 warriors. Damon stood to his left, one arm hanging limp from a shattered shoulder, but his other hand gripping his shield with the determination of a man refusing to die quietly. The Persians assembled like an ocean of steel and flesh, filling the valley from edge to edge. Thousands upon thousands of fresh troops, immortals in gleaming armor, infantry in tight formation, cavalry pawing the dust in anticipation, archers with quivers full, and even more war elephants lined up in a fearsome row, their tusks painted with symbols of death. At their center, a new general sat atop a massive armored horse, his cloak embroidered with gold, his helm encrusted with jewels, the chosen champion of Xerxes sent to finish what the previous general had failed to do. The champion raised his sword high, sunlight flashing off its polished blade, and the Persian warriors erupted into a scream that shook the mountains. But the Spartans did not scream. They tightened their shields. They inhaled slowly. They locked their eyes forward. Lysandros raised his voice, hoarse, ragged, but certain. "Spartans," he whispered, loud enough for all to hear. "Our brothers died behind us. Our families live behind us. Our gods watch above us." He lifted his cracked shield. "And today, we show Persia that the shields of Sparta do not break." A deep silence followed. A silence of acceptance. A silence of destiny. Then the earth shook as the Persian army charged. Arrows streaked across the sky in a black wave, but the Spartans angled their shields, forming a dome of bronze that deflected the deadly hail. The first line of Persian infantry struck the phalanx with brutal force, and the gorge exploded into chaos, shields clashing, spears splintering, blades swinging in desperate arcs. Lysandros drove his broken spear into the throat of a charging soldier, kicked another backward into his own comrades, and slammed his shield into a third with a roar that tore from the depths of his soul. Nikarit fought like a storm unleashed, her spear dancing in whirling arcs of death, piercing throats, bellies, hearts. Damon fought with pure defiance, using his shield as both weapon and armor, smashing skulls, breaking ribs, defending the young warriors behind him with unyielding resolve. But the Persians were endless. The enemy surged like a relentless tide, one wave broken only for another to crash in its place. The phalanx shrank. Warriors dropped. Shields fell from lifeless fingers. And still, the Spartans stood. The first war elephant reached the pass, its massive form blocking out the sun as it charged forward. Down! Lysandros roared, and the Spartans crouched as boulders rolled from the cliffs above, slamming into the elephant's flank, sending it crashing sideways into a torn mass of screaming archers and infantry. But two more elephants surged in, and the ground trembled violently as they barreled toward the thinning Spartan line. Spears! Nikarit shouted, and a line of Spartans thrust fire-tipped javelins into the elephants' eyes and mouths, sending them into frenzied agony. One beast spun wildly and trampled half a rank of Persian infantry before collapsing in a thunderous crash that shook dust from the cliffs. Yet even with the beasts falling, the Persians pushed harder, immortals sweeping through the chaos with curved blades, elite soldiers slipping through gaps in the phalanx. Lysandros blocked a strike aimed at a young warrior, twisting his body to counterattack, but a second blade slashed deep across his ribs. He staggered, blood pouring down his side, but forced himself upright. "Commander!" Nikarit cried, trying to reach him, but the crush of bodies between them kept her pinned in place. Damon took a heavy blow to the helmet and fell to one knee, his vision swimming. A Persian soldier raised his spear for the finishing strike, but the young recruit Damon had encouraged earlier lunged forward, intercepting the blow with his own shield, only to be cut down moments later. Damon roared in anguish and rose again, slamming into the nearest attackers with renewed fury, tears mixing with sweat and blood. The Persian champion finally entered the fray, pushing through his own men with a giant two-handed blade. He towered over the Spartans, his strike so powerful that every impact sent shockwaves through the phalanx. Lysandros faced him first. Their blades clashed with thunderous force. The champion was strong, immensely strong, and Lysandros, battered and bleeding, found himself forced backwards step by step. The champion's blade slammed into Lysandros's shield, splitting it clean in half. A gasp rose from the Spartans. Nikarit screamed his name and fought harder to reach him. Damon broke formation, shoving aside enemy soldiers to help. But Lysandros, shieldless and wounded, refused to yield. With a primal roar, he lunged forward and drove his shattered spear into the champion's thigh. The giant faltered for a heartbeat. Just a heartbeat. But it was enough. Nikarit burst through the chaos like a streak of fire, leaping onto a fallen shield, launching herself upward, and plunging her spear into the champion's throat. Blood sprayed across her armor. The giant collapsed, shaking the ground. The Spartans roared triumphantly, but their triumph was cut short by what they saw next. The Persian army did not falter. It surged forward harder, angrier, filling the gorge with bodies and steel. Lysandros could barely stand. Damon breathed in ragged gasps. Nikarit's arms shook from strain. The phalanx was no longer a wall. It was a thin string. A dying flame. An ending. Lysandros looked around him at the remaining warriors. Less than 30 now, everyone bleeding, everyone swaying, everyone refusing to drop their shield. His voice broke as he whispered, "Brothers, sisters, Sparta." He raised the half-shield still strapped to his arm. "This is our final stand." And in one last surge of defiance, the Spartans charged. They slammed into the Persian line with the fury of a cornered lion, tearing through enemies with sheer willpower, with bare hands and broken blades. Nikarit fought back-to-back with Lysandros, her movements fueled by pure rage and love for her homeland. Damon took a spear meant for a young girl and killed 3 men before collapsing. One by one, the Spartans fell. One by one, their shields clattered against stone. Until only Lysandros and Nikarit remained, fighting as though they were an entire army. Lysandros drove his broken spear into another Persian throat before a blade pierced his stomach. He gasped but kept fighting, blood spraying his cloak. Another blade struck his back, another his thigh. He sank to one knee. "Lysandros!" Nikarit screamed, but an arrow pierced her shoulder, then another, forcing her backward. The Persians surrounded her. She snarled defiantly and raised her spear, only to be overwhelmed by a dozen blades. She collapsed beside Lysandros, her hand reaching for his. He grasped it weakly, blood pooling beneath them. We held, she whispered. We held Lysandro's. He nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his lips. Sparta endures. And with the final breath of the last Spartan commander, the cliffs of Arion fell silent. The Persians stood among the dead, staring at the wall of bodies, thousands of their own, littering the gorge. Silence fell across the valley. And somewhere, in the distant halls of history, a voice carved into eternity the truth of what had happened that day. That 80 Spartans had held against an empire, and their courage had outlived them all.